I'd like to go ahead and introduce our lecturer for today. He is a longtime engineer with the Union Pacific Railroad and an expert on the Southern Pacific. He's a past vice president of the Southern Pacific Historical and Technical Society, and he's authored a book on one of the trains of the Southern Pacific. So it's my pleasure today to introduce Mr. Mike Jarel.
My name is Mike Jarel. Thanks for coming. This is really impressive. I've been with the railroad since February 1978. For just a little under the first year of my working with the Southern Pacific, the Saugus Depot was still an open train order office, so I feel sort of connected to history a little bit, although it also makes me feel a little old. When Collis Huntington and the rest of the Big Four completed the Transcontinental Railroad promontory, Huntington's sights were already set on other grand endeavors. He wasn't satisfied with just one transcontinental railroad. He was looking to build another one and wanted to build south of California and across the southern perimeter of the United States to New Orleans. Right away after the driving of the Golden Spike, he moved the construction forces and materials to a location at the top of the San Joaquin Valley named Lathrop, just below Stockton, and started construction through the San Joaquin Valley, heading for Bakersfield. Of course, the intention was to open up that valley to agriculture and further migration. As they built south through the valley, somewhere between Tulare and Bakersfield, he stopped construction and moved his forces across the Tehachapis and San Gabriels into Los Angeles and started working north. The greatest obstacles were below Sumner on the map, which became Bakersfield. They reached Bakersfield in 1874 and opened up the San Fernando Tunnel. This is the Sylmar into the tunnel. This train's heading north into the tunnel, which I just did last Monday too on the train. So with the driving of yet another Golden Spike at Lang, the line between Los Angeles and basically the Bay Area was opened up. This is Lang, stationed as a train order office in the 1950s. This is basically at the mouth of Soledad Canyon. Henry Mayo Newhall was a pioneer and also had some interest with the railroad. He foresaw what was happening and started buying up land in this valley and deeded some of the property up around the Saugus area to the railroad to build a station in a town site, which was appropriately named Newhall, which might sound a little confusing because that's where present-day Saugus is today. Now, about 2 years later, the town pretty much picked up and moved to the present-day Newhall. Water was a problem at Saugus. They found the town site over here to be more appropriate, and so the town literally picked up and moved itself. This depot was originally at Saugus and was moved to Newhall. This is the present-day Metrolink station, which is where that station originally stood. In 1886, the railroad started a branch out of present-day Saugus up through the Santa Paula Valley to meet up Ventura with the coastline and up into Santa Barbara. This was the initial step on the southern end of building a coastline down from San Francisco. At the same time, Henry Mayo's son decided to start up another town site, needed some more property around the Saugus area, and the town of Saugus was created, and the town was named after his father, Henry Mayo's birthplace in Massachusetts. The coastline was opened up to traffic in 1900, and originally went through the Santa Paula Valley on the present, what's left of the Santa Paula branch, through Satacoy, Santa Paula, and Fillmore, and met up with the Pioneer Line, basically where Magic Mountain Parkway meets Bouquet Canyon and San Fernando Road. Now, almost at the same time that the coastline was being finished, there was a branch line built down to Oxnard, as well as a branch line built from Burbank out to Chatsworth. Even as the line was being finished up the coast, it was felt that this would be a more favorable route into Los Angeles. The problem with the line through Saugus is the steep grade through San Fernando Tunnel and the Sylmar that required helpers and was just not operational. Problem, So between 1899 and 1904, another line was built over Susana Pass on a grade that was about half of what the grade is through San Fernando Tunnel, about 1%. This became the principal line into Los Angeles and relegated the Santa Paula line as a branch line, which was still important because the Santa Paula Valley was being developed for farming and produce. A new depot was constructed and opened up at Saugus, which is the building we're standing in right now. Now we're sitting in the freight room, and originally it was an open dock facility. Then later on the dock was closed in. This station is pretty close to a sister station to both Satacoy, which is still standing, being used as a building materials store, as well as Carpinteria. The main difference between Saugus, which is really a unique variation between these common standard stations that the railroad built, was that where the second story ends at the end of the building here, there's an additional baggage and express room that was built out here. Another difference that really makes Saugus unique is there is not a freight dock that would be served by rail cars in the front of the depot. There was no spur ever built, as well as the back of the depot. I suppose it was intended that most of the carload traffic that would come in and out of the Santa Clarita Valley would continue to use the Newhall depot for freight. So basically this depot would serve mail and express and passengers and not any carload freight. And as far as talking about these combination depots, the railroad developed common standards for just about everything. When you have a far-flung system, you need to be able to standardize your materials and what have you. To have an architect design a custom station for every location on the railroad is just an economic impossibility. So what they did through the years is they drew up these standard depots, and they could be shipped out from general shops areas of the railroad, Sacramento, Los Angeles, almost in kit form, and deliver it to the site, and then basically just follow the plans and build the station up. There were always variations to fit a particular community's need, but the smaller communities along the railroad usually would receive these what are called combination depots, which stand for combination freight and passenger. Principal towns like Los Angeles and San Francisco, they would have enormous freight terminals and separate passenger facilities, but these smaller towns, everything could be consolidated in one building. The second story would generally be used in communities or towns where there wasn't any suitable housing for the agent, and the upper story of the depot would be the agent's quarters for either himself and his family to live in. These are all over California, Arizona, Texas, Oregon. Here's examples of single-story combination depots in Lancaster, and the smaller one up in Ravenna. These depots could be, although to the same fairly common standard, they could be built very small or have much enlarged facilities depending on the traffic that was expected. Here's a view of downtown Saugus. I would imagine around the turn of the century or a little bit before. The depot's right here. This would be San Fernando Road, and present-day Saugus Café would be right around in this area right here. This is the south fork of the Santa Clarita River. In 1890, the Tolfree family opened up an eating house and utilized the second story of the depot for a hotel. Apparently, the railroad anticipated the need for an agent and agent's quarters and probably a lot more business at Saugus, but early on, the railroad apparently had the space to be able to lease out to Tolfrees to establish a restaurant, and the upper story was used to rent out rooms. Tolfrees had eating houses established in Mojave and Bakersfield, sort of like, if anybody's familiar with the Harvey houses on the Santa Fe. Before dining cars became into general use, trains had to make meal stops, and so the depots that were designated meal stops had to have some sort of eating facility. This restaurant was right behind the wall behind you. In 1899, the chain was sold. I don't know if they took control of all the eating establishments, but Tolfree sold the restaurant, and it became Saugus Café and was moved across the street into this building. And Saugus Café continues today as the oldest continuous business establishment in this valley. This was probably taken around the 1920s. This is in the 50s. These buildings were torn out, and the cafe was expanded. This is the present-day building that the cafe still resides in. They also had a motel at one time. You can see here the west leg of the Y starting across San Fernando Road. I guess this would be Bouquet Canyon at the time. San Fernando Road turned left here and continued to San Fernando Road to what became Highway 99. Now it's Magic Mountain Parkway. The Santa Paula branch followed San Fernando Road to the west. Here's the same area, but we're looking geographically south. The depot's across the street. We're at the junction here. San Fernando Road curves off here. And just in case anybody thought that traffic was an issue only in today's era, you can feel comfortable that traffic jams that go all the way back to the 20s. Saugus Depot was also more or less a movie star. In 1923, Charlie Chaplin filmed The Pilgrim utilizing the depot in town. Also in 1954, the movie Suddenly with Frank Sinatra was shot both in Newhall and at Saugus and utilized the depot. Even later on in 1989, the depot was again used for the Grifters, starring Angelica Houston and John Cusack.
Get out of here. Get the sheriff. Tell him to get over here fast. It's an emergency.
What's the word?
Special train number 1019 carrying the President of the United States will arrive suddenly 5 p.m. today, U.S. Secret Service.
No mistakes, huh?
Only in typing.
This gun's got a heavy recoil. It won't stand still. And we got just 3 seconds to nail the president.
2 presidents visited the depot, Benjamin Harrison in 1891 on a campaign tour, which he lost the election. And then Teddy Roosevelt in 1903, and it's been said that he was on his way to visit a friend that lived in Acton. The Saugus area was also location of one, I've been told this was one of the last big train robberies in the United States. I'm not sure whether that fact's true or not, but the northbound or railroad westbound West Coast passenger train was derailed and then robbed by this bandit Tom Vernon. You can see the Saugus Speedway off to the right there to give kind of an orientation of where this happened. And this is also right around the present day Metrolink Santa Clarita Station stop. The engineer survived the derailment but later died from his injuries. From what I understand, he really didn't get away with that much money, and he was already on parole. Just sort of a layout of the depot, actually, as it is today. We're sitting in the freight house right here. This room right here is where the Tolfree Café was. This is the passenger waiting room, which is now the gift shop. There used to be a ticket counter right here. This is kind of open now where you can walk in. This is the agent's area and desk where the bay window is. Right now there's a kitchen. I understand this was at one time an additional bedroom, and then this area here is the baggage and express room. The upper story just had 4 simple rooms, which is very common to all the 2-story combination depots. There were basically 4 square rooms accessed off a center hall at the top of the staircase. This is the freight dock that was at the rear of the station, which was, again, not for service by rail car, but just for wagons or trucks to pull up and pick up whatever was offloaded off of an express or whatever off a passenger train or baggage. And this is the now enclosed freight room into the depot, which we're sitting in. And this is the front of the depot. We usually refer to the front as the track side of the depot. You can see a bay window here. Most of the depots had a bay window with a window for the agent to handle business from patrons from the platform area. That's a close-up of the, probably called a ticket window. This is the agent's office, the back wall with a desk, and I'm not sure whether this is a file cabinet or an icebox. I'm not quite sure. This is the door leading into the baggage and express room. This is more or less contemporary before the depot was shut down. The operator's desk, the train order operator's desk or agent's desk, when he sat at this desk, he was acting more as the train order operator. This machine right here, in later days, the east end of the west siding was what we call interlocked, where the operator can control the switch and set the signals for a train to come into the siding. It was a manually operated signal. And you can see down at the base of the controls, you have a red area and green quadrant, so there was no confusion to how he was setting the signals. The operator's typewriter. These were special typewriters, I believe, made by Royal. They do not have lowercase type. Everything typed on a train order had to be in uppercase. See various forms of telegraph equipment. These types of shelves here are real handy to a train order operator because usually the train orders had to be typed in several copies, and so there would be train order forms and then a carbon copy, then a form, then a carbon copy, and depending on how many orders had to be copied from the dispatcher, he would just peel them off and then get them into the typewriter and start taking dictation from the dispatcher. And this box up here was called an annunciator. It would give the operator advance notice of the arrival of the train from either direction. There would be a little bell that would ring and a light would illuminate, and then he could cancel it. If he had to deliver train orders up to a train, it would give him enough time to get out with his orders. This box below apparently is a switchboard. Supposedly the depot was a major junction in the railroad's communication system for the local area and tied into all sorts of different division points in the general offices in San Francisco. When these railroads were being built across the country, we think about traveling on two-lane highways where cars and trucks pass each other on separate lanes. If you can imagine a road being built with just one lane and everybody had to pass each other somehow, that's pretty much how the railroads had to be constructed. To build two parallel tracks across the country was just astronomically expensive and just nearly impossible. So what they do is they build a single line and then at frequent intervals would construct sidings where trains would pull over into an auxiliary track and allow another train to pass or to go by. And so a system had to be developed. First thing is they had to standardize time. Everybody has heard of standard time and the different time zones. Well, this was developed out of necessity by the railroads. Just about every community, every state in the country at the time, they all had different time standards, and they set their clocks to different standards. And this was dangerous on the railroad because if you had one crew that was leaving one division point in one state or one community and a train leaving another, and they're working off at different times, this could be dangerous. These trains would meet and pass based on times given in the schedule. This is a 1938 employee's timetable, and it shows a total of 14 scheduled trains through Saugus. The way these schedules, it isn't like you think of an airline schedule or a bus schedule where it just shows what time a bus or a plane's due to take off. These times also conferred authority for the trains to move from one station to the next. There was a hierarchy or class of trains. First class trains, there was superiority. First class trains would be superior to second class trains, and so forth. So if you were on a second class train, it was your responsibility to clear the time of first class trains and so on. For instance, here's out of Saugus, a train was due to leave at 9:02 p.m. and he had authority to Hamby, and at 9:10 his authority extended to Humphreys, and at 9:18 it just continued on. And inferior trains in the opposite direction would work against these times. And they just had to make sure that they were in the clear before the leaving time at any one of these stations that had sidings. So you had to really know your running time, and you had to know the railroad. But just like anything else in this world, nothing goes as planned. So the dispatcher could alter these times or help other trains work against delayed trains by issuing train orders. This is a pad of train orders. They're on very thin yellow sheets that we used to call flimsies. Copies had to be kept by the operator and delivered to both the head end, the rear end of the train, the caboose, as well as any helper engine crews. And if orders were to be picked up at any station, the operator or agent would set this train order signal to the stop position. This is a bidirectional signal. As you approach the signal, the arm to the right, which is also painted red, would be your signal. The arm to the left is the opposite direction and was painted white. And then this round L up here, there's a lantern that would be up here and would illuminate these lenses as the signal rotated. So if a crew approaching a station saw a red train order signal, he knew he had to stop and pick up orders that were going to change or alter what was in the timetable. Now in later days, we couldn't stop trains everywhere there were orders to pick up, so there had to be a method to deliver orders to a train that wasn't restricted at that station, but have restrictions further up the line, and be able to deliver to these trains that were coming by sometimes at high speed. Palmdale was a great station to come up to at 65, 70 miles an hour and reach out and try to grab these orders. You had to get your hand in the loop of that string. And heaven forbid that you miss those orders, because not only were you embarrassed around the division, the train had to come to a stop. You had to get those orders. This is a pretty typical train order delivery pole, which this depot is very blessed to have one. They're very rare. There's a nice action shot taken at Burbank Junction you can see the orders hanging in the loop. And when the engineer on this train just reached out and grabbed these orders, he put his hand through, and as soon as you grab that string, these arms were spring-loaded, and they would flap up like this and clear to get out of the way. Now the orders that are strung up right here, that's for the caboose crew, and they would get down on the platform in the lower steps and reach for them from the steps. Now, back before railroading was a bit more automated, trains that had to enter a siding and more or less pull over, they had to stop. Trainmen would get out, line the switch, they'd pull into the siding, the rearman would line behind, they would wait for whatever superior train had to go by. Here's an example of two freights meeting up at Vincent at the top of the hill between here and Palmdale. You'll notice the numbers up in the windows here. The Southern Pacific displayed the actual schedule numbers of the trains in what were called train number indicators. It made it easy for other crews to identify what trains they were meeting. Now this steam power train is holding the main and going by while the crew on the diesel power train is probably inching up through the siding. Here's a view from one of these locomotives called cab forwards. They were basically a steam locomotive turned around backwards so that the crews not only could see better, but in the tunnels that were very prominent out the west coast, the crews wouldn't get steam and gas to death as they were going through a tunnel. Steam was behind as they moved through the tunnel. The only problem is if you stalled in the tunnel. But this crew's bearing down on Saugus, Los Angeles bound. As you can see from the train order signal, the arm to the right, he's got a clear order board, so he's got no orders to pick up. And these two inferior freight trains and their crews on the ground are patiently waiting for the passenger train to pass by. Starting, I believe, the technology goes back to the mid-1920s, but really came into maturity in the 50s and 60s. Centralized traffic control was designed to where a dispatcher, instead of dictating to all these train order operators along the line, who also, the operators were also responsible for reporting the trains as they went by. That way the dispatcher could keep track of the progress of the train as they passed each station. And then the dispatcher could make decisions on how to either adjust through train orders or just allow everything to keep moving as they are. Now the dispatcher at his fingertips, just by throwing switches and pushing buttons, could line switches and set signals for the trains over his district. Here's a track profile of the district. This basically is a map of the railroad with lights all over the board, which shows where the trains are at, and then it would also show the position of the switches. And then what would happen is, as the crews approached these signals, which had A plates on them originally, which showed that they were absolute signals, which means the dispatcher had control over these signals, the combination of the signals would tell the crews what's going on, whether they're going to head into the siding or continue down the main. So this train has pulled into the siding and is still pulling in. Hasn't stopped. It's all been done automatically. The switch has been thrown. The signals were set. He just moved right on in. In fact, he's probably going to go in right around this train standing on the main. As soon as he clears, the dispatcher will get an indication and set the signals in the switches so this train can move on. The most ideal need is where both trains don't stop. Now this is a more modern train order signal that was used in the 60s and 70s, basically just color type, and then this was a letter type light that just said TO on it, would light up and just identify the signal as a train order signal. Now the railroad in later years, of course, would improvise. They could use anything for a train order office if they didn't need a full station. And of course, the agent wasn't expected to live in this caboose. Now here's a track layout of the Saugus area in the modern era, post-1920s. You had the main line going through with what was called the west siding and the storage track, although the storage track was oftentimes used as a second siding. Then you had an east siding over here, a storage track, and I believe this was a spur for spotting rail cars for unloading, but interestingly, it was not up against the dock at the depot. And then you have the Y track leading to the Santa Paula branch and off to Ventura. There's an aerial view taken, I believe, in the 1950s. Here's the depot, Saugus Café, San Fernando Road, which curves around, which is now Magic Mountain Parkway. You see the west leg of the Y leading to the Santa Paula branch. Here's the east leg of the Y. You can actually trace this east leg of the Y if you know where the Hertz rental car agency is. Their fence line follows that property line. Then we have a little bit of train action through the Saugus area. There were a number of famous passenger trains that operated between Northern California and Southern California. Southern Pacific had a fleet of daylight passenger trains that they ran up the coast and up to San Joaquin Valley and up north of Portland. The trains began to be dieselized in the early to mid-1950s. This is at Hamby, right near the Via Princesa station. This line has been relocated. Instead of this curve right here, the line just kind of comes straight across now. This is the Sylmar end of Newhall Pass. The 210 freeway and the 5 freeway meet at this location. It's almost completely covered in freeway. This local is heading down the Santa Paula branch towards Fillmore. Has just left Saugus and is right around Magic Mountain Parkway and Valencia Boulevard. In 1967, the railroad completed probably one of its last major construction projects. They built a cutoff between Palmdale and Colton so that traffic could bypass the very congested terminal of Los Angeles. This diverted a lot of freight traffic off the Saugus line. The train order stations at Vincent and Ravenna and Lane were closed, and that left Saugus as the last open train order office between Burbank and Palmdale. The Saugus line basically just handled traffic to and from Los Angeles Basin. At the end of 1978, I don't know whether this is coincident with the retiring of the agent that lived there and the fact the railroad just didn't want to pay to move another agent in. They went ahead and closed the depot. Community effort was able to get the depot donated by the railroad under the provision that they move it off the property. $60,000 was raised in 1980 to move the depot to where it is presently. They basically had to rotate the depot around and then place it down so the front of the depot still faced the tracks, because now it's on the west side of the main line. And this addition up here, I'm not sure when it was built, but it's a little addition that basically gave plumbing to the family. As originally built, there was no electricity or plumbing in the building. There were outbuildings and a lot of kerosene lanterns. So as you walk through the building, you see a lot of exterior conduit. In 1982, Gene Autry donated a Southern Pacific steam engine. It's a mobile type built in 1900 and was up at his Melody Ranch. It's been a long dream to get that engine fired back up again. It would be great to see it actually able to move. In the meantime, efforts still continued to restore a lot of the apparatus that went along with the depot. The station was fortunate to have a complete wigwag-type crossing warning signal and its original train order signal donated along with the depot. Santa Susana wasn't quite so lucky. They basically had to piece theirs together using all sorts of donated and fabricated parts. I still haven't executed the revenge on a colleague of mine who gave my name to Pat and said that she might want to call me and see if I might be able to come down and identify what appears to be scrap metal. I was quite frankly stunned to see these signals in the condition they were. They were still pretty much complete and hadn't really had too much corrosion. We found the semaphore signal head in a storage container. So the process started. This was a year ago last summer. We started organizing the effort to get this stuff moved out of the dirt and begin restoring and getting them up. Concrete was poured to form bases. It had to be a 6-foot hole. I believe it was 6 by 3 by 3. It was a lot of fun lifting those signal heads. They're enormously heavy, and you have to get the signal head right into a pin. 30 feet up in the air was an interesting job. I took the wigwag banner home and restored it and then presented Pat for a Christmas present with a ribbon on it. So we have a new landmark. Pat, for Eagle Eye on eBay, we found the lantern. That's the only thing that was missing from the train order signal. This goes on top of the signal mast and will eventually illuminate those train order signals. And that's it.